Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us as this is the forecast with Stingray and TP. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to sit here and talk to you about the threat of severe weather for the New Year's Day into the New Year's Day, or New Year's Eve into the New Year's Day time frame. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring up my co-host, Taylor Plott. Taylor, how are you doing today, sir?
Pretty good, Stephen. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. And I got to tell you, man, there is a lot of anxiety from a lot of people about this event coming up, and especially with it being here close to New Year's Day.
Exactly. And, we're no stranger to severe weather here in the South, really throughout the entire year. I mean, of course, our peak's always in the spring, but we are in our second or fall tornado season. And that actually runs into January as well. So, yeah, with everything going on, 2020 being the type of year that it's been, I know the anxiety gets pretty high, especially when we talk about severe weather down here. So hopefully we can answer some of the questions that people, really would want to know about what's going on.
Absolutely. And let's go on ahead and introduce ourselves. I'm going to start with you first.
All right. So, Taylor Plott was my name. I've been weather enthusiast really my entire life. Going to Mississippi State University. I'm on the weather team at CBS 42 in Birmingham. We'll be doing all our severe weather stuff. We'll be doing tomorrow into the evening and overnight hours, and so we'll probably be looking at a full staff with that. And got my first TV gig actually in Wyoming. So a Southern boy moving out to the Mountain West. That was interesting, especially with the winter. The winter can be very brutal out there for sure.
Well, let's go on ahead and take a look real quick at some of the weather issues. And by the way, let me go ahead and start with the radar. And there was actually just expired a tornado warning down in Louisiana. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is of course a system that we're watching for tomorrow, and I'm not gonna lie, the fact that there's already been at least don't know if the tornado actually touched down, but at least there was a warning involved with these cells moving in. It just goes to show you how dynamic a system this is. I mean, the instability that we're really looking for severe weather really isn't fully being produced right now, and the fact that this is already producing, as you see, there's definitely some spin in some of these showers. It's just a lot. There's a lot of wind shear out there. There's a lot of dynamics at work. So the fact that it's already producing at least potential tornado issues, that's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive, especially with this time of year and this type of system that's moving on in.
Absolutely. And of course, there is also some more that are just north of this radar site. Let me go ahead and back this out. There are also some signatures up here towards the Monroe, Louisiana area as well.
Yes. And the fact that it's getting all the way up there into Monroe is very interesting. Matter of fact, you even see, even though it's way up in the atmosphere, it does look like there's some rotation in the upper levels up there, getting towards the Arkansas state line. So lots of turning of the wind with this system.
And especially that little couplet, both of those couplets right there, just off to the northwest of Winfield, Louisiana. That looks rather impressive as well. So let me go ahead and back this out and show you real quick that this is a very volatile situation. Now, where would you say that the low currently is right now?
There's the low that we're watching getting going across the Gulf Coast. It really hasn't formed yet. What's going on with this is that there's the the first low that developed, if you will, is moving on up into parts of Canada. And so this is along this cold front, this kind of boundary that's being draped across the area. And then you're getting this other low that's going to be developing probably near the Houston, Texas area around there. And it's going to rapidly intensify as it goes, as it moves to the north. And so that really hasn't gotten going yet. I'm going to try to pull up on my phone here the Weather Prediction Center, and
Okay.
it will show the analysis. So yeah, there's right now just a cloud I was talking about up in Canada. That's north of Toronto, northwest of Montreal right now. And so that cold front's draping all the way down into Louisiana. And so then that additional low is going to develop along that, right along the Gulf Coast. And then that's going to be our big weather maker coming up for tomorrow into New Year's.
Well, let's go on ahead real quick and show the viewers right now what we have in store as of right now for the day tomorrow, and the day 2 outlook on for New Year's Eve has now placed a lot of the area underneath a enhanced risk of severe weather. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a good bet. I think the best instability shear combination is going to be down there across Louisiana. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that enhanced risk gets bumped a little bit to the east. Include places like Gulfport, Biloxi, Hattiesburg, Laurel, Mississippi, down there in the or along was it Interstate 59 down there.
Yes.
If they do move it into Alabama, I would expect it to be far southwestern Alabama, close to Mobile, down towards that area, because that's really where the bulk of the instability looks to be setting up. Now, can it change? Can it be moving? Can things change to be more further north? Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. One of the things that we've been watching is the system keeps changing almost each model run. I mean, literally last Saturday we were talking about how the models are showing this as a potential, a winter storm setup across the southeast, dumping inches upon inches of snow, and then that's rapidly moved into a severe weather risk, and that low continues to move according to the models. So there's a lot of uncertainties still with this, but I do think that's a good bet that the enhanced risk is going to be down there across Louisiana, Mississippi, maybe getting into far southwestern Alabama.
All right, so let's go on ahead and go region by region. So if you are in Mississippi, and I have some followers over there in Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
You guys are in Mississippi basically from Greenwood all the way over to Bastrop, Louisiana, and points off to the south and east. You guys are in a slight risk, but remember now, if you're down here in Vicksburg, Natchez, or Brookhaven, the National Weather Service in Jackson has not updated their graphics yet, but you guys are now in the enhanced risk of seeing severe weather. So once again, let's go over here. If you are in Vicksburg, if Brookhaven, Natchez, Macomb, Mississippi, you guys are actually in the enhanced risk now.
Yeah, and you and me were talking this earlier before we got on got the show going. It's possible that Jackson just hasn't updated their graphics yet. I'm not obviously part of the weather service. I don't know exactly what's going on down there, but sometimes what they'll do is they'll update their graphics. They do them as packages. And so usually they have the morning team, they'll go in and do their morning package, and that's usually out by like 6 o'clock in the morning, very early on in the morning. And then you'll get the evening shift come in around 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then once their forecast package is done, it could be close to like 4 or 5 o'clock. So it's possible they're just getting that going right now.
They just updated it. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull you up full screen. Go grab that, and I'll be right back, okay?
All right, that sounds good to me. So, yeah, I mean, just like what we're talking about, that update, the package, the Weather Service, they have rotational shifts. And so the afternoon and evening shift, what they'll do is they look through all the forecast guidance stuff, just like we do in the TV field. And once they get done with that, they basically issue everything at once. So they have like a forecast discussion, the graphics, everything that you see when you go on their webpage. It gets updated, kind of as one whole thing at one time. So the fact that they updated it, like I mentioned, it's probably about 4 o'clock when they did it. So we'll see what they have, but um, definitely an interesting system. It is an interesting system for sure, and so there's still a lot of questions to be answered with it. So hopefully, as we go further on to the show and kind of not digest, dissect some of this model data, maybe we can get a better idea of what could be going on.
All right, so I'm back, and there
it is. Yep.
Okay, so now if you were in the enhanced risk, if you were down here in, make sure that you guys can see it, just had to make sure. Basically, if you were down here in the Natchez to Brookhaven to Macomb area, you guys can see damaging winds upwards of 70 miles per hour, severe storms likely, and maybe the outside shot of seeing a strong tornado. Maybe that this system with the instability and a lot of wind shear, there could be a few EF3 tornadoes tomorrow night.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised about that for sure, Stephen. The best instability and shear combination is definitely where that enhanced risk is located,
right.
And with the shear, all the severe weather parameters that we're seeing, yeah, I mean it's definitely possible that there could be a couple of strong tornadoes. Those would be defined as EF2s and greater. With that, is this a big outbreak type of setup? I'm not really leaning towards that idea because there is just the instability that's being provided is still kind of on the lower end of things.
Right.
But it's different in the wintertime. And I know people might think, well, it's severe weather. How is that different? A tornado is a tornado. Yeah, that's definitely true. But the wintertime, there's not a lot of fuel for these storms to work with. It's much more limited. And so the tops of the storms, they only get up to maybe about 40,000 feet during the wintertime. Now, the springtime and summertime, they get upwards of 50, 60, even 70,000 feet. And so that means there's a lot of fuel for these thunderstorms to get going, and that can lead to stronger tornado potential. So the fact that we're in the wintertime and the instability is naturally going to be more limited, you have to get really everything perfect for it to be a pretty significant severe weather event. So yeah, it's definitely possible that there could be a couple of strong tornadoes down there in Louisiana, maybe even into southern Mississippi for tomorrow night into Friday.
Okay, the reason I left just for a second is because we actually had a viewer ask on Twitter, Truett, ask about the Baton Rouge, Louisiana area, and that's the reason that I pulled up the graphic from the National Weather Service in New Orleans / Baton Rouge. If you guys are watching me in New Orleans and or Baton Rouge, you guys are in the enhanced risk for winds in excess of 60 miles per hour, hail greater than 1 inch in diameter, and look at this, Taylor, a few tornadoes, some possibly strong, by the National Weather Service in New Orleans, aka Baton Rouge.
Yeah, that's right down the line what we're talking about. I mean, there's definitely enough wind shear out there to get stronger tornado potential.
Yes.
And right where that enhanced risk is, that's where the best instability potential will be. So you got that best combination down there. So I mean, I think that's a good possibility that there could be some strong tornadoes possible. How strong could they get? We don't know because obviously the storms hadn't developed yet. But I mean, strong tornadoes, you talk about EF2 or greater. So definitely would be on the at least the middle part of the EF scale.
Yes.
Potentially.
I don't think we're going to see any EF5s out of this, but definitely some strong tornadoes are very possible with this system. Now, let's go ahead and take a look closer to home. if you are up here in central Alabama, basically from Hamilton all the way down to Eufaula, you guys have a threat of seeing severe weather. But the most dangerous of the weather is possibly going to be from Tuscaloosa, Clanton, and Montgomery, and Troy points off to the west and southwest.
Yeah, and one of the things I do want to point out is the timing on this. It continues to change. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, it was last Saturday, we were talking about, or at least watching the models that were actually showing snow potential here with a potential, what would have been a decent winter storm setup if it actually, came to fruition the way that the models are showing. And now it's all back to this severe weather idea, and the timing just keeps getting pushed back and back and back. I mean, it was literally yesterday we're thinking that maybe the storms move in around supper time for New Year's Eve, and then it continues into the overnight hours. Now we're thinking that, okay, maybe it's a lot more closer to, say, midnight when we change over to the new year, and then getting into the early morning hours on Friday, and even lasting into maybe parts of the early afternoon hours.
Yeah, so it's definitely something to definitely keep an eye on. Now, if you're down here in the Mobile area, this is from the National Weather Service down there in Mobile. They just also updated this graphic as well. This one was done at 4:43 a.m. So let me real quick refresh and pull up the new graphic. And there is the new graphic from the National Weather Service down there in Mobile. And the majority of their coverage area is in the slight risk for the area for the damaging straight line winds and a few tornadoes late Thursday afternoon into Friday morning.
Yeah, and then down here is where the timing gets a little more different than would it be in central Alabama.
Yes.
You're going to get a lot more showers and storms well out ahead of the main cold front the further south you get towards the Gulf Coast, because once again, that's where the better instability is going to be located. So I wouldn't be surprised if they start seeing storms down there closer to, say, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening on Thursday, maybe even a little bit earlier than that. It's really kind of tough to tell based on how the models are still kind of going back and forth on some ideas.
And another thing too that we haven't thought about, or we probably thought about but haven't considered, is let's go back to this. If a lot of storms hug the coast, that could really impact the severe weather potential up here.
Yeah, and if people, obviously follow along with how some severe weather setups go down here, we always mention how sometimes certain setups will kick off what we call an MCS, a mesoscale convective system, basically like this cluster of showers and storms that get going along the Gulf Coast. And that's because in the upper part of the atmosphere, the main driver for the weather system, that piece of energy, it starts moving up into that favorable zone where it starts kicking up showers and storms all the way down there across the south.
Right.
And it's definitely possible. It's definitely possible with the system, especially with the low actually developing itself along the Gulf Coast and moving up to the north. The trough would definitely be situated in a position where it could kick off showers and storms down there. But the thing that it looks like would be the most likely scenario would be it would kick them off, but it wouldn't set up down there and kind of stay down there. They would be able to move pretty quickly. The killer for severe weather threats beyond the Gulf Coast is you get that cluster that develops and it just hangs around there. It hangs around the Gulf Coast and they just get pounded with showers and storms hours and hours on end. And the fuel that is needed from the Gulf of Mexico can't punch through it. It's like a giant brick wall that gets going. So I would think that any showers and storms that develop, as you see here with the NAM at about 9 o'clock for your New Year's Eve, they'll develop. I don't doubt they'll be down there, but they're going to be moving about 50 to 60 miles per hour off to the northeast.
So are you ready to run through the models and look at some of the parameters as well?
Yeah, let's go ahead and dig into it.
Okay. All right. So, of course, as you can see, this is 9 p.m. on Thursday. We'll move it along to midnight, and here comes the line. And it looks like this, Taylor, is going to be an extremely thin line of storms coming through here.
Yeah, that's one thing that I was actually thinking about would be a good possibility with this is that you're probably going to get showers and storms that develop out ahead of that line. That line
Yep.
is the cold front itself. And with the cold front, I think it could be a very, very thin line of showers and storms. But within that line, you can get the little brief uh, tornado potential in that line, what we call mesovortices. They're just little circulations that develop in the line, exactly like what we saw happen in Hoover a couple of weeks ago with
Yes.
that line that came through with no lightning whatsoever. The dew point was actually 57 degrees. Um, I don't know. I have to go back and look. I know we always talk about for severe weather potential, you need that dew point generally around 60 or above to get
Right.
tornadoes down here. I don't know if that actually would beat a record for the having a tornado actually physically touch the ground and do damage with a dew point at 57. So that could be something. But it just goes to show you that even with these very thin lines, they can quickly produce not only wind damage but tornadoes as well.
Without a warning, too.
Yeah, and the warning, and I know a lot of people were kind of like, well, obviously, why wasn't there a warning for that? Really and truly, the
Yeah.
Weather Service when they saw it, the tornado had already gone. By
Yeah.
the time they had gotten the radar data for that, that tornado had already touched ground, done its tree damage. I think some trees fell on some houses as well, and it was already gone by the time that they could have put a warning out for that.
And that's kind of what you have to deal with, those low Cape high shear events. I remember
Hmm.
a couple of years ago, I think it was back in 14 or 13. You may remember this, Taylor. There was a tornado that actually touched down without a warning in Demopolis and did a pretty good amount of
Hmm.
damage down there. And I believe that was the night that they were supposed to have Christmas on the river down there.
Yeah, I do remember that, and that was again just one of those things where we can only do certain things with the technology and the build and the ability that we have. Um, with the radar beam, what it does is it will go around. It usually takes about 5 minutes for it to complete a scan, and so you can easily get a tornado or damaging wind event or like a microburst during a summertime thunderstorm that happens in between the radar scans. So even though it was there and it happened, nobody was able to see it.
Right. All right, so let's go on ahead. That's midnight, and so your cold front is basically coming from about Vicksburg to Natchez, all the way
Hmm.
down, getting in here really close, just off to the northeast of the Baton Rouge, Louisiana area, and then stretching down to New Orleans. All right, so then we go to 3 a.m., and it actually looks like it's trying to weaken as it pushes into eastern Mississippi and then West Alabama.
Yeah, and here's where the tricky scenario starts coming into play. There's no doubt in my mind that during the daytime across Louisiana, Texas, even southern ports of Mississippi, where we saw the previous image about midnight, there's no doubt in my mind that there's going to be a line of storms that develops along the cold front. There's going to be supercells that could potentially develop out ahead of that. Those would be the ones that would be producing the potential strong tornadoes across the enhanced risk area. But once we get into that midnight, 3 a.m. kind of time frame, you could even extend it to say midnight to 6 a.m. New Year's Day, talk about Friday morning. That's where we start getting iffy on certain ideas on how this is going to pan out. One of the things I've been watching, and we'll get into this a little bit later on, is the instability is still going to be there, but the models are weakening the storms. And I think one of the reasons why it's doing that is you're getting the one piece of upper level energy that's going to be the main driver for the severe weather across Louisiana, Mississippi. It's going to be moving pretty fast to the north. The way that the trough is going to be kicking out as a negative tilt, the energy that you would want to see hang around is actually going to start to move away because you see it, the storms up there closer to Memphis along the Mississippi River, back up where that right back up where the low would be further to the west. You see all that starts getting intense. and then the rest of the line starts kind of breaking up. So you got that one piece of energy that is actually going to be leaving potentially when the storms start to make its way into eastern Mississippi and western Alabama. Now behind it, they're getting another piece of energy that starts moving in, and then you start seeing those storms start to blossom just a little bit more down there across southern Alabama near daybreak on New Year's Day. And so that's going to be an interesting time frame from, say, midnight to 6 a.m. on. It could be possible that we're watching this line, maybe even some storms out ahead of the line, start to weaken, because that upper level dynamics start to move a little bit further away from them, and then they weaken, and then all of a sudden here comes this other piece of energy around, and then we get storms kind of flare back up again. It's an interesting thing that the models are look like they're hinting at.
And some of these storms, when they broke up here, those could be supercellular in nature, and that's not a good thing, especially as we get into the pre-dawn hours while people are asleep.
Right. The rule of thumb with this type of setup is usually the further north you get away from the Gulf of Mexico and the best instability, the less intense the storms usually will be. One of the things that would be interesting to watch is there is definitely such thing as too much wind shear. I use the analogy of if you take a weight like a dumbbell in your arm and you lift it up, and say it's like a 20-pound dumbbell, and you lift it up, you can easily put it all up over your head. Well, you've got enough energy in your body, you've got enough muscle capability to lift that dumbbell up and lift it up above your head. So that is what you deal with good instability and good wind shear. The updrafts are able to sustain themselves. Now take that same dumbbell and now say, okay, you're going to lift 80 pounds from the ground and lift it overhead, and you get up and you're like, I can't do it. So that's the updraft with the limited amount of instability that it has, and the wind shear is that weight on the dumbbell, and it just tears the updraft apart. They just can't get going whatsoever. And so it's possible that the further north you get, north of I-20, where, yeah, there definitely is a severe risk with this. I honestly beg the question of, is the wind shear too much for that area? And the updrafts that try to get going, once they get into that, the updraft gets further into the atmosphere and encounters that stronger wind shear, it can't keep up, and literally the updraft just gets torn apart, and the storm dies immediately.
So that is the position of the cold front there at 6 a.m. basically from Memphis all the way down to Mobile, pushing into West Alabama. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, by the time we get to 9 a.m., it has crossed into basically it's pushing into Tuscaloosa right now, and the storms are firing once again with that other piece of energy over here in East Alabama.
Yeah, and that's also going to be a combination of that. On top of, you're going to get an instability surge because you're going to get daytime heating coming back. One of the things that obviously is difficult during the nighttime is sustaining the instability, because you get the instability based off of heat and the latent heat that is in the atmosphere that is giving fuel for these storms. And you take that source of energy away, which is the sun, and now all you're going off of is just the amount that is left over, and some other factors that we won't get into because that actually gets really, really technical. But so at 9 o'clock, the sun's coming back up. I know there's obviously going to be a lot of cloud cover out there, but the radiation from the sun, still gets through, and so the instability starts to rise again. And so once again, here you go into a time frame where it could could go either way. I mean, you can get storms that flare back up, and they flare back up very quickly and can become severe very quick, or there's still just not a lot of instability out there for what they need for the wind shear. So it's definitely something we'll have to watch. Another thing to watch is that cold front is still going to be well off to the west of where these other storms are forming. That little line that you see Stephen showing there, that is where the cold front is. And you have the question of, is there enough instability even left over for storms to develop along that front, or is it just going to be showers?
Right.
If it's just going to be showers, then your severe weather threat is going to be with that cluster further to the east of it. And then once that moves out, you have no more worries for the remainder of the day. So it's definitely, there's still a lot of questions with this system that we usually don't have with the way that our models work and how our forecasting capabilities are. Um, so it's not unusual for us to have a lot of questions this far out, but it really doesn't happen a lot um, with what we usually are able to do.
And then, of course, hold on. And then, of course, by noon, it is completely into Georgia, stretching from Atlanta all the way down to Tallahassee.
Yeah, and then by this time, once it starts getting into Georgia, um, the low pressure system itself is going to be moving on out, and the way that it would be positioned, it becomes. I'm not saying that there won't be any severe weather risk for Georgia or even into the Carolinas, but you start getting a lot less favorable stuff going on the further east that you get.
And Taylor, based off of let me pull this up here real quick. I apologize. I want to make sure that I'm doing this correctly because I want to make an observation. Oddly enough, with this severe weather issue, um, your line of storms is oriented and moving from the southwest to the northeast.
Yes.
Usually, when cold fronts come in, they come from the northwest or west and
Mhm.
move east. Do you think that could have any kind of issue on what we see with severe weather, just simply because it's angled at a different way than what we're accustomed to here in the South?
Yeah,
That's an interesting thing to look out for.
yeah, that's a really good question. And this isn't going to be your typical wintertime cold front that moves through. And that's because the low is actually developing along the Gulf Coast, if not over the Gulf itself,
Right.
and moving on in. And what it's going to do is it's going to rapidly what we call occlude. And so what that means is that the low actually gets pushed further away from the main frontal systems. And so usually when we talk about a system that occludes, what happens is the cold front races well out ahead of the low. And what this is doing is the low, when it develops along the Gulf Coast, that cold front's going to be originating over the Gulf itself. And so you're really not going to see a lot of cold air come in behind it. It almost becomes, I guess you could throw it out there, that becomes what would be considered a pseudo dry line.
Right.
What that basically means is that it'll be considered a cold front, but in reality, it's just more drier air that's moving in behind it, as opposed to a lot more colder air moving in. So it almost has more of that dry line type of characteristic, like you see during the spring and summertime months, especially over the plains. You got that dry air coming across the eastern side of the Rockies, across New Mexico and Texas. That you just have the air gets drier instead of really colder.
Yes.
But no, back to your point with the orientation of it, I actually think that would be more favorable for a severe weather potential because of the way the wind fields would be organized. What we look for in the lower and middle part of the atmosphere, we get the surface winds, and we get up to what we call the low level jet. That's about 5 to 8,000 feet above our heads. And so, in order to get tornado potential, we have you would want the surface winds to be what we call backed. You want those winds coming out of the southeast instead of the south or southwest. And so the way that the front's moving in, the way the low's going to be oriented, we're going to have winds at the surface coming out of the southeast. And then you go about 5,000 feet above our heads, the winds going to be coming basically south-southeast to due south by the time the storms move in. So you already got that really good turning of the winds from the low in the lower levels. And so I actually think that the way it's oriented, it would actually increase the the tornado potential somewhat just based on the fact of the wind shear and the what we call storm relative helicity. That's basically a fancy term for how much spin the thunderstorm can actually ingest and can actually rotate, kind of how fast it can rotate. And when you start getting those winds coming out of that southeasterly direction, that what we call directional shear, that direction change increases that spin in the low levels. So, yeah, I know it is odd. It's definitely odd that it comes out of that southwest location, but the way that things are oriented wind field wise in relation to that, it actually would increase the tornado potential.
Well, let's go ahead and take a look now at the instability and kind of give us your best thoughts on the instability and these parameters around the system.
Yeah, so everybody knows that in order to have storms in general, you need fuel for them to get going. That's our instability that we talk about. And as of course, during the wintertime months, you really don't have a lot. You see the majority of the instability is situated all the way down there across the central Gulf of Mexico. If we had all those values coming up here, there'd be no doubt in my mind we'd be dealing with the severe weather outbreak. But
Right.
the good news is that's going to be staying all the way across the Gulf of Mexico, like it usually does during the winter months. So you get what we call a low instability, high shear setup, or high shear low cape setup, whichever way you want to say it. And so that basically means that the instability is going to be low, but the wind shear is going to be high. And what that does is it can offset the fact that we have less fuel. If there's enough wind shear, it can actually compensate the fact that there's not a lot of instability out there. But then you get into the question, like I talked about earlier, is there going to be a setup here where there's going to be parts of the risk area that's going to have too much shear and not enough instability, and the storms can't get going whatsoever. The updrafts get torn apart. And that's a really good question. And we don't really know exactly how that's going to pan out until the storms actually move through. But right now, as you see at midnight, as we're ringing in the new year, you're going to have the best instability confined to areas close to, say, Monroe, Louisiana, over to Vicksburg, down towards Natchez, Mississippi, over to Hattiesburg, and down towards Mobile. That little jut of instability coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. That's where your best potential is going to be as we head into midnight. Now, one of the things that we will watch is as we go later on into the night, the way that the winds will be coming off the Gulf of Mexico. In my mind, there's definitely a question of could the models be underestimating the instability, and that's something that I have been thinking about over the past couple of days. And one of the things that you look for, and it's just when you go and study meteorology, study the dynamics of the atmosphere and stuff like that, you start to look at, okay, well, based on where the surface low is, how strong the surface low is, the wind fields associated with that surface low, you start to anticipate and expect, okay, I would expect the dew points to be kind of up in this area, as opposed to this. And one of the things I've been watching is, could the models be underestimating that instability? And it is definitely possible. It's definitely possible that the fact that this is going to be such a rapidly developing system, the wind fields are going to be rapidly intensifying. You're going to get a big fetch of Gulf of Mexico moisture out ahead of this, that it could actually be a little bit more unstable than it actually is. Now, as we head into Alabama, that issue gets a little more iffy because the winds, I know we didn't get the graphics with the winds. The winds are going to be oriented basically out of the southeast as the storms start rolling in across Alabama. And so what that means is that the origin of your moisture content in the air, the dew points that are across the area, they aren't going to be coming from the Gulf of Mexico. They're going to be coming from the Atlantic, going across Florida and across Georgia. And so you're getting not enough moisture associated with that because the air kind of dries out as it moves on in. So the whole thing could be boiled down to just how oriented are the winds going to be at the surface as this front and this system comes through. If you end up getting a lot more of that drier air or the moisture coming in from the Atlantic, your dew points probably aren't going to be getting up into the mid 60s until the front really arrives. And then you only have a very small window of opportunity right there.
I just noticed something. Check out this. Okay, so here's the instability at 6 a.m. And the instability is from Memphis basically down to Mobile. But if you look at the radar at 6 a.m., it's right in line with it. But if you step it along, it's almost like the prefrontal stuff outrun the instability. Yes. And then the storms that refire back here, these storms, the reason that they start to refire is because they've actually caught up with the instability over here in West Alabama. So this stuff over here in East Alabama could just be a soaking rain because it outruns the instability, because the instability lags over Mississippi between 6 and 9 a.m.
Exactly, and that's definitely a possibility. That's why I was talking about with you have this one piece of energy that moves through, and that creates what we call prefrontal convection. That's the showers and storms that get going ahead of the front.
Right.
And they are going to be booking it on Thursday night into Friday. I mean, these storms could be racing anywhere from 50 to 60 miles per hour. I mean, very, very fast. And so what is definitely a possibility, like you're pointing out, Stephen, is that those initial storms that get going where the instability is, they eventually outrun it. And then the instability that is remaining is back there along the front.
Right.
And so that's definitely something we'll have to watch for. I do anticipate that there will be a weakening trend happening sometime by midnight to 3 a.m. with the storms as they move into Alabama. But then the question will be, can they stay connected to the surface-based instability if there is any left, or do they actually outrun it like the models are suggesting? I think it actually could be a good bet that they outrun it because that prefrontal wave that moves through it doesn't care whether it has instability or not. It's going to just continue to book on off to the northeast and keep those showers and storms with it. So I mean, it doesn't care where the instability is. It's going to be like, I'm going this fast. If there's no instability, well, there's no instability. But the showers and storms I have with it, they're just going to continue to roll on. And then the focus would be, all right, well, is there going to be enough left over in the atmosphere to get anything going along the front itself? And that would be a good question to see what happens. That we don't really, the models hint at there is a possibility. I mean, if you go to the radar, future radar at 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, I mean, it does show that there are definitely showers that try to get going along the front. So does that mean that it's hinting at, yeah, there is going to be storm potential with it? Or is it actually like, yeah, there's going to be enough forcing to get showers going, but it's going to be nothing more than just showers?
Right. So it's definitely a very, very volatile setup because, I mean, it can change instantly. And then, of course, the models can be underplaying it or overplaying it as well. So, I mean, who knows? I mean, this could literally turn into a heavy rain and flooding event, or it could turn into a significant, severe weather issue.
Yeah. If I had to say a location where there would be a potential for a significant event, severe weather event, it would be right where the Storm Prediction Center has that enhanced risk, and maybe you could move that a little bit further to the east into southern Mississippi to include Gulfport, Biloxi, and the Hattiesburg area. But there's a lot less questions over here where the bulk of the severe weather risk is highlighted, as opposed to across here and into western Alabama and even eastern Mississippi.
Yes.
There's a lot more questions over here than there are over there. Based on how I've seen some of these things go before, you can definitely get these little, I guess you consider it like a fly in the ointment type of
Yeah.
type of thing, where you think that the models, have the instability right on point. But what can happen is that if you get a lot of cloud cover out ahead of this, which the more likely going to have, that prevents the heat that has already been produced by daytime heating. It keeps it at the surface. One of the things that I know people would notice is that if you have a clear night in the wintertime, it gets quite cold, and
Yeah.
that's because the heat that has been generated by the sun during the day, it turns into what's called radiational cooling. That radiation that heats up the Earth's surface, it goes immediately back up into space, and it gets really cold. That's why if you live out west during the summertime, it could be 95 degrees during the day, but at nighttime it gets down to 45 because there's clear skies and the heat just goes right up in the atmosphere. So what can happen is if you get a blanket of clouds, just like what happens at nighttime, if you have a cloud cover, you're not going to get that cold. Well, in this case, if say it gets to 70 degrees in Tuscaloosa for New Year's Eve, and you get a lot of cloud cover that moves in ahead of the system, the temperature might not only drop to maybe 66 or 67, and so you have a lot more heat content available at the surface. Um, but the models, they do take that into consideration. It's not like the models don't know exactly what would happen with cloud cover moving in and stuff. It takes into account of that when it talks about the instability. But sometimes it has a tough time determining how much is actually left.
So once again, there is your time frame for the Birmingham National Weather Service. If you are up here from basically Hamilton over to Gadsden, down south to Eufaula, Troy, and Demopolis, there is your time frame from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m. For West Alabama, Central Alabama, 5 a.m. to 11 a.m., and then Far East and Southeast Alabama, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Yeah, and that timing, even though it continues to change, it will be key. Um, I will say this: if it does happen to where everything backs up even more, and really your Thursday is going to be focused on this area, and then it's going to be not Thursday morning or not overnight, early Friday morning, but actually Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
If that timing keeps pushing back, then I think that the severe weather risk could be somewhat not extremely high, but a little bit higher than what we would be thinking right now if this moves into the core of central Alabama, say around noontime for your New Year's instead
Yeah.
of New Year's Eve.
Definitely. And then of course, if you're over here in Mississippi, if you're just not joining us, Thursday night is the best time for it. Late Thursday evening through the overnight hours. And they're in the enhanced risk if you're down here towards Natchez and Brookhaven, Mississippi. And a couple of strong tornadoes are very possible down there in that area. And then, of course, New Orleans, basically, if you are basically along from about Hammond, Louisiana, to New Orleans, Macomb, and then Crystal Springs, Mississippi, and points off to the south and to the west, you're in the enhanced risk for a few strong tornadoes possible.
Yeah, and I still think that's going to be the big bullseye, if you will, of where the main severe weather risk is going to be associated. One thing I didn't want to get into if the energy helicity index. I know that's a long word, and for big weather enthusiasts out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
If we can find where that EHI graphic is, I've come to love this. It is. I have noticed that if you're really looking for a severe weather parameter to look at, it's going to be the EHI for determining where the instability is going to be. I think it's going to be in that separate email that I sent. I had to send them in groups because of the size of the files. But what the EHI is, it stands for Energy Helicity Index. And what it does is it takes into account the instability that is available, and it takes a look at the wind shear, the helicity values. What the helicity is basically it's how much spin a storm can ingest and can actually rotate. And the higher the number, the greater the spin is, and then the greater potential for not only tornadoes, but you start getting to a stronger tornado potential when the numbers get higher. So what the EHI does is it says, okay, well, here's the best instability. There it is. So here's where the best instability in wind shear combination is. And so this is at 9 p.m. on Thursday, so 9 p.m. on New Year's Eve, and you see it's right where that enhanced risk is across Louisiana. You see the values down there, the legend at the bottom. Really and truly, when you start getting into a decent severe weather and tornado potential, you want that number to be 1 unit and above. And so that's going to be in the colors of the darker and lighter blues. But you see, as we head later on to the night, it naturally goes away. That's because you're losing the instability, but you still see it has some numbers out there. That's because you're still maintaining some instability, but you still have a lot of that wind shear out there. So you're probably going to get a weakening trend as you head into the early overnight hours on your New Year's Day. And so we're talking about midnight, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. That's because the instability drops off, but then you see it bumps right back up as we head towards noon. So while you have values to begin with across Louisiana during the evening on New Year's Eve, up to 1, maybe some localized 2s in that area, that's where that big severe weather risk is going to be. But then it starts going down to, say, 0.5, 0.7, slightly below a unit. That doesn't mean that you're not going to see severe weather. It just means that the likelihood of actually seeing it goes down.
Yes.
And then it starts to ramp back up for your noon time frame on New Year's Day, but that's because it's showing that instability is going to come back around and there's still wind shear available. So you're going to start to see that jump up again. But then that's just a question of, is the atmosphere too worked over? Will the storms or showers that flare up along the front itself, can they actually do something? Or are they just going to be rain showers, maybe a couple rumbles of thunder, and that's it? That's a question that I wish we could answer, but we don't have all the facts available. And the fact that things keep changing, that lowers our confidence greatly. If this system hadn't been changing its timing, its positioning, and some other things with it over the past 24 to 48 hours, we would have a lot better idea of what's going to happen on Thursday into Friday. But the fact that it keeps changing the position of the low, the position of the trough moving in, the timing of things moving in, that just makes the overall forecast confidence very low.
All right, man, I'm seeing something. Wow, look at the EHI right up here. And you see that it's really maximized along the Highway 82 corridor. We may actually, let me go back over here. We may actually have to start watching this band over here in central Mississippi as it gets severe weather over there. And then as it moves on through the night, it'll move up towards the Tupelo area. So that right there could definitely be a possibility of seeing some supercell thunderstorms near the Philadelphia, Mississippi area with that batch over there in central and far eastern Mississippi as we go through the night, because as you will watch, the EHI basically follows that batch up towards the north and towards North Mississippi and southern Tennessee. Watch it. It just goes from here at 9, and then it just traverses the state of Mississippi and goes on up into the far northern portions of Alabama throughout the night. And that's where that little batch of storms over here, see, it explodes when it goes from 6 to 9 p.m. It really explodes over here and then continues to explode throughout the night as it moves on up to the north.
Yeah, and that's going to be the what we call prefrontal supercell potential. And so those are going to be your more discrete storms. Another issue with this is how the storm mode is going to actually evolve. And what I mean by storm mode is that are they going to be individual cells? That will be supercells along a line. Could they be supercells embedded in a line or embedded in a cluster? I think you're going to get a ton of storm modes with this. You're definitely going to get a line that's going to develop along the front itself. You're definitely going to get individual supercells out ahead of it, especially across Louisiana and southwestern Mississippi. But what's it going to do when it moves into, like you're mentioning, central Mississippi, northern Mississippi, up there towards northern Alabama? And it could be a situation where you do get a batch of severe storms that are going, and they have enough energy to do whatever they want, and they just continue to ride this system on up. I do think the further north that you get, obviously the less instability you're going to be able to have. But is there going to be a spot up there where the instability and wind shear could still just be perfect to where, yeah, even though there's limited instability, it's enough to keep the storms going and keep them producing severe weather. And that's when you see that marginal risk up there from, say, near Decatur down to Tupelo, Hattiesburg, Columbus, Mississippi. That's when they have that marginal risk, is because, yeah, there's still that potential there, but it doesn't look to be as much, at least in the Storm Prediction Center's eyes. I know that Jackson has that other graphic right there where they have a little bit of a different idea.
Yes.
They have that slight risk. And I think that it's definitely possible that slight risk at the weather service in Jackson has up towards Tupelo and stuff would be warranted. I definitely think there should be enough instability up there for storms to work with. One of the other scenarios I could see panning out, and this is just going back on noticing how other past severe weather events have kind of unfolded, is that you could easily, with this system, get two separate areas completely distant from each other that get severe weather, and then there's nothing anywhere else. So I think that you could get a spot where there's definitely tornadoes, damaging winds, bad storms down across the enhanced risk area. But then it could be possible that you get this other batch, like you mentioned, across central Mississippi into northern Mississippi, and that's your other batch. And because it's a lot more closer to the low, it's a lot more closer to the warm front, where you have a lot more turning of the winds at the surface. And so you could get these just two little areas that are like hundreds of miles separated, and that's it. That's your severe weather risk. It actually happens across Louisiana, and then you get this other little spot that happens across northern Mississippi, and then elsewhere it really doesn't pan out. I mean, that's definitely a possibility. I've seen that happen before. I've seen it happen to where you have the bulk of the zone that the risk center is at, and it does get severe weather, and then about 200 miles away, where the marginal or part of the slight risk is, that's your other spot that actually has a lot of severe weather, and then everybody else is like gets rain.
Well, let's go back to the radar, because I want you to take a look at some of the couplets that are active right now. And we were not even supposed to have severe weather over that area here recently, and we've actually got a couple of couplets. And check out some of those, and especially, let me circle for you this area right here, this one right down here, and then of course you've got this one that's really tight right there.
Yeah. Let me double check where that is located. There is a marginal risk out there today, but I think it is, if I can get my phone to work correctly. Yeah, that's nowhere near where the marginal risk is located. The marginal risk today is across Texas, from like Brownsville up to Houston. And this is talking about, we had that tornado warning earlier in Louisiana. So one of the things that we'll have to watch is, okay, yeah, we're still forecasting, we're still looking at model data for what we can expect for tomorrow, but then it's just going to boil down to what we call nowcasting, which is literally we look at the radar, we track the storms, and we see what happens from that. And the fact that you're already getting some of this stuff happening across Louisiana, well away from where the risk is supposed to be today, that already tells me that the system's already overperforming.
Yes.
And so you do have to take that into account.
Yeah, definitely. And I do have, hold on 1 second. I'm gonna have to close the app. I apologize. I had to redo the app there. I
Don't you
apologize.
just love technology?
I do, yes.
It works for you, and you love it, and then 1 minute it's just like, yeah, don't want to do it.
So, yeah, I apologize for that. But anyway, well, man, what are your thoughts basically for Central Alabama?
So, really, everybody needs to know that there is a risk for severe weather. Basically, your New Year's Eve, the time when you have your festivities. I know a lot of us probably aren't going to be doing it this year because of the COVID-19 stuff going on. But if you are, doing stuff with your family, watching the ball drop, New Year's Eve, when you're having that going on, there will probably be some storms that will be rolling through, and they could be on the severe side as well. So have a way to get warnings. I do still think that the best potential for severe weather across Central Alabama will be along and south of I-20. I hate to. I don't really want to go. I don't really want to say that it's going to be mainly west of 65, especially with the fact that it looks like you could have almost these two separate windows of opportunities. One being the storms moving in during the late night hours, and then you have Eastern Alabama where the storms will be moving in during the day on Friday, where you have a little bit more instability to work with. So I will say that for Thursday night into the early overnight hours Friday morning, your best bet of severe weather is probably going to be south of I-20 and west of 65. And then during the mid to late morning, maybe into the early afternoon hours for your New Year's Day on Friday, that threat shifts south of I-20 and then east of 65. So really and truly, I think the area to watch for is going to be just south of I-20, along and south of I-20. I mean, it's possible. Obviously, you get stuff north of that, but that's just looking at the overall instability, how everything kind of congeals together. The best bet of having the best combination of things is going to be from Tuscaloosa to Birmingham, and then up to Gadsden for your Friday, and then down south towards Montgomery and the Gulf Coast.
Well, and definitely we're going to need to keep an eye on all of this stuff as well as it continues to push on off to the northeast for our friends up here around Monroe and then Greenville and Cleveland, Mississippi as well. But real quick, while we've got people here, I do want to do one quick thing. Let's look at the current radar situation. Now, there are just a few prefrontal showers up here towards Hamilton, Russellville, and all that, but everything around Tuscaloosa is dry. And I expect Tuscaloosa to stay dry until we get some time this time tomorrow.
Yeah, you're definitely going to have some showers to deal with, like you're seeing moving across Mississippi right now. You're not going to be dealing with any storms tonight, but once we get into your Thursday time frame, that starts to change. Another thing that will be with this system too is just the wind in general.
Yes.
You're going to have such a rapidly developing area of low pressure. The wind fields are going to be enhanced, and so it's possible that you could be seeing, just outside of any storms in general, on Thursday, sustained winds 15 to 20 miles per hour, and could see gusts maybe up to 30, 35, maybe even 40 across parts of the area. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Weather Service in Birmingham, maybe Huntsville, Mobile, maybe a kind of a regional office thing where they issue a wind advisory.
I got you. Well, man, if that's all, I think that's going to wrap up this edition of the forecast with Stingray and TP. We hope you guys have enjoyed this. And as always, TP, will you be on TV tomorrow in the event of tornadoes?
We will be on TV, obviously, at CBS 42 for severe weather coverage. Of course, our chief meteorologist, Ashley Gann, will be taking charge of that, as always. Don't really know what all the plan is because the models just keep changing, but we're probably going to be fully staffed, myself, along with the rest of us down there. We'll be watching the radar very closely.
Absolutely. And of course, I will be here on social media providing severe weather coverage as well, not necessarily to take away from the TV side of things, but to give guys on social media a view of what's going on.
Yeah, and we're getting to a world now where there's a lot more people paying attention to social media than actually TV itself. There's a lot of people who don't have cable.
They like to do this.
Exactly. We like to do this. We like to keep our heads down on our phones. So yeah, the media field is definitely changing for sure.
And honestly, real quick, I want to touch on this subject. April 27th, 2011, it was a red letter day for a lot of people across the Southeast, Mississippi, and Alabama. But we also, in the weather community, learned so much on that day, because I don't know about you, but I heard a lot of stories about, well, we didn't know anything was coming because we focused basically on social media and nobody really hit the weather on social media. So that told us right there that, hey, we have got to start pushing tornadoes and outbreaks and severe weather on places like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok.
Yeah, and you think about 2011, and obviously it's coming up on 10 years. It'll be 10 years in 2021. But you look back on that. I was a senior in high school, and we had social media. We had Facebook. I believe we had Instagram. I think, yeah, we had Instagram back then. And you had Twitter. But when you look at it as a whole, the social media field itself was still in its infant stage, if you will. And you had all of the people in the media, you weren't really used to that because it's just something that you really didn't think of. It was still, I hate to put it like this, but it was almost like we had still an old-fashioned approach, which is you get the news from the newspaper, you get the news from the TV, you get the news from the radio. All of these, the three main things that you've always had for years and years and years. And so then when you had this big outbreak coming, which was forecasted perfectly, I mean, the Storm Prediction Center did a great job with highlighting the areas. I mean, I know you probably can't find the graphic right now, but there's definitely a graphic out there that shows exactly where the risk area was and then where the tornadoes happened. And it was literally as perfect as you could get with that forecast. And so obviously, me not being in TV yet, I was still a senior in high school, but paying attention to it on TV for several days in advance. It was, hey, this is going to happen on Thursday. I believe it was a Wednesday. It was Wednesday. Hey, we're looking for severe weather potential with this. And then the day of, it's like, okay, we're really looking at a severe weather risk for this. And then all of that rolls through. And then all of a sudden you get this, well, we didn't know it was coming. Well, where did you get your information from? Well, I got it from my phone. And then it started us in the weather field thinking, well, what has happened? And you've had a lot of lectures on this. You've had a lot of people do papers. There's really good research papers on the social side of getting forecasts for these big severe weather events. Matter of fact, earlier this year at a weather conference that we had up here in Huntsville, the Barron Weather Conference, there was I'm blanking on the lady's name, but she had a very good speech and lecture on where people get the weather information and how it has changed over, I forget her time frame, but it was several years. And you could definitely see a change from getting things like we would growing up on TV and the radio to, oh, it's now Facebook, Twitter, and social media. There's been a definite flip
Yeah.
in where people get the information, and we just didn't know about it because it really wasn't. You didn't really know, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You didn't know that it was a big issue. And the only way, unfortunately, that you could find out that it was a big issue is having a big severe weather event like we did, and then people coming up and say, well, we didn't know it was going to happen.
Right.
And then you ask, where did you get your information from? I got it from Facebook and Twitter. And you go and look back, and there was very little things that were being shown on social media with this, because it was just, you had your mindset that was kind of the way it's always been, which is TV.
Yeah.
You get your forecasts on TV. So the media, it's definitely changing. The media field is definitely changing. There's a lot more people that get information from social media than they do on TV. There's a lot less people who have cable. I have some family members and some friends of mine who are some of them. My brother doesn't have cable. He has YouTube television. Now that does have local television stations available with it, but you look at the majority of the people, they have Roku, or they just look at Hulu, or they just stream stuff on Netflix. And so you have to get your weather information from that other option, which is social media.
Right.
So it's definitely changed. It's definitely changed, and it will continue to change into more of you're getting it from social media than you are from actual television itself.
Absolutely. Man, I think that's going to do it for this edition of the episode. Is there anything else you would like to say before we sign off?
Just you stay weather aware for Thursday. If you live across Mississippi, Alabama, of course, Louisiana, and Texas, this is definitely a big dynamic system. It can definitely overperform easily. It can throw some surprises at you that we didn't really see in the models. Anytime that the models are having a tough time determining where the low is going to be and when the storms are going to move in, that means there's a little faith that we have in what the models are showing. I mean, we still look at them, we still see what they have and stuff, but you start being like, okay, you keep changing almost every model run, something's up, and so then you start having a little or less faith in what it's actually showing you. So just prepare for severe weather. That's the best way I can tell you. Prepare to go ahead and prepare for tornado warnings on Thursday night into Friday. Prepare for having severe storms Thursday night into Friday. And if we don't, that's good. We would have dodged the bullet. But if we do, then you're already prepared and ready to do what you need to do.
And I will always be right here on social media doing a radar and weather update. In the event that we do have tornado warnings, I will be here live on Twitter, Facebook, and of course YouTube, doing severe weather coverage for you guys. We hope you guys have a wonderful new year, and we will see you guys with another show next week.
See you guys.